Hey, gang. So with 3.20 coming in about 5 months now, probably dropping with CitizenCon or IAE, we're going to be getting the whole C. So the whole C is a little bit of a meme in the community because it has gone on and off of development for probably the better part of, I would say, at least 3 or 4 years. And it just sort of, we've seen it in various states and it always looks like it's pretty much finished, but CIG kind of refuses to drop it. And I felt like it was probably a good time to kind of go into the whole A, or the whole C, this is the whole A, and explain why it is that even though in the intervening time CIG has dropped other ships that were incomplete without all their features or even their game loop in, why they didn't release the whole C. I felt like that might be an interesting topic, so let's get into it. Development-wise, the Hull C is one of the older concepted ships in the game, smashed into the Kickstarter, I think between the Carrack and the Herald way back in December of 2013, which would make it a full month younger than the Banu Merchantman. But I'm not bitter. Moving on. So the Hull has been out there on the drawing board for a while, and for about probably 4 years ago, it started popping on and off the roadmap, and work really began in earnest on building it out a few years back. And we even saw portions of the model that were pretty far along, both inside and outside. And that was around 2018, I think. And here we are with the Hull C likely finally dropping in around the end of this year. So what took so long with this ship? There's really two things about the ship that stalled it out. And the first was the actual physical nature of the ship, and the second was its purpose. So the second is a little bit more complicated, so let's tackle the first one first. Other ships have been dropped in without their full game loops fully realized or realized at all. So it seems like the Hull C, being the most common ship in the verse, which is its tagline, would be a good candidate for that treatment, just being a pure cargo runner. But it was ultimately stalled out because of the nature of those folding arms. Those arms are apparently a hell of an engineering problem from the programmatic standpoint. And from the sounds of it, the nested physics grids took CIG a couple years to solve. On top of that was the issue of the cargo, as when the cargo was physicalized, or mostly physicalized, having a million tiny entities, those little boxes, vomited out onto those arms would have been a huge problem for server health. And that's kind of a good segue into the second and much larger set of issues. Beyond the issues with the physics grid, there were a lot of other issues that needed to be resolved before the Hull C could be brought in. And that's really why it's spent so long on the slow walk to release. On the upside, it should be an incredibly well-polished ship when we get our hands on it. But the release of the Hull C is an incredibly good sign for the future of Star Citizen because of all the associated tech that has come along with it. So let's dive into some of those. One of the things that was needed before the larger Hull series could come in was the larger cargo containers. Just from an engine standpoint, the nature of external cargo of the Hull series is problematic because it can't be culled away when it's not in view. It's always in view. With something like a Hull A, this isn't a big deal as its cargo load isn't that big. But with the Hull C, it starts to matter a lot. A fully loaded Hull C will have around 4,600 SCU, and if those are a single box for each of those SCU, that would have caused the server to explode. So the solution CIG has known that they would have to have for this ship for a long time is bigger boxes, and so these are the containers that represent larger SCU values. This seems pretty obvious, but because CIG likes to go hard on fidelity, they've said that in the past that they want to have the contents of those boxes also be physicalized to some extent eventually. So when you open the box, you can physically see what is in that box. But still, having bigger boxes means the contents of those boxes can be culled out until those boxes are open, and ultimately that results in fewer visible entities on the average. Outside of the cargo boxes, maybe more important is the cargo itself. So for years now, we've been hearing about Star Citizen's desired economy, built on the skeleton of Tony Z's Quanta. Most people at this point have heard about Quanta and know it's some sort of control for the NPCs of the verse, but the reality is a little bit more complicated. Okay, so it's a lot more complicated. Partially, yes, Quanta is the probability volumes for encounters. So Quanta knows that, let's say, NPCs are lying in your path between point A and point B, and it rolls the dice to see if on your travels you go through the area where they are. I mean, and I say this often, that there's a reason they call it space. So probability volumes, that rolling of the dice, is one aspect of Quanta. So you go through that area of space where those NPCs are, it rolls the dice, and if it comes up snake eyes, then you're pulled out of quantum travel and you meet those NPCs. But Quanta is also the foundation for the entire underlying dynamic economy. So right now, the economy is faked. It's static. A location has certain commodities that it spawns on a timeline. So a mining base, for example, spawns, let's say, 18 SCU of laranite every 30 minutes, and it will buy 20 SCU of food every 10 minutes. Let's just as an example. At a city like Lorville or Area 18, the only two items that are produced for the entire planet is waste and scrap, but it buys everything except for that waste and scrap. The goal of Tony Z's economy is to eventually have it work like an actual economy. Prices will be driven by supply and demand, but more than that, goods will be produced from less complicated components. So one will need, say, quartz and laranite to make a lens, so that location will buy that quartz and laranite, and they'll sell those lenses. So they're buying one thing to make the component, they're producing a component, and that's what they're selling from that location. And those lenses could then be a smaller component in, let's say, a laser. And that laser also requires a circuit board, that lens, laser barrel, cooler. You get the point. So all of those components come together at another location where people are bringing in those sort of subcomponents to build the larger laser to that new location. And if anything in that chain is broken, from the quartz to the fully built laser itself, those lasers will become both more rare and more expensive. But it will also generate cargo missions to fill in those gaps. If players don't snap those missions up and make those deliveries, then Quanta with the NPCs will fill in those gaps. At the end of the day, the goal of Tony Z's Quanta is that the players can impact the economy, but they can't crash it or corner it like in other games like Eve or, from what I understand, Elite Dangerous. At most, they can create short-term market fluctuations and possibly exploit those. With the whole sea coming out, the entire economy will begin to change towards this dynamic economy. It will have to change. This change will hopefully include more of the dynamic economy I just mentioned, but that's not 100% necessary for the whole sea. What will be necessary is a big change up to what commodities are available and where, and how they're moved across Stanton and eventually beyond. Effectively, ships like the whole sea are bulk movers, but when those arms are out, it can't land on a planet or a moon. So remember back when I said that the big cargo stations only produce waste and scrap, and they don't buy it. They will have to change this if the whole sea is going to be anything more than a weird touring vessel. I don't think CIG would do that just based on what they've said about wanting to release ships with their game loops. So expect those big cargo stations to actually start buying up everything the planet below needs to produce its stuff that can't be found locally, and selling whatever it is that location produces. What's more is that it should create something of a stratification in the trade ships, something that's missing right now. Smaller ships won't be able to really compete with the whole sea for pure hauling between major ports, but they will definitely be able to fill in the gaps, both transporting things from station to planet and planet to station, but also from those smaller production nodes scattered throughout the system. Real small haulers like the starters all the way up to something like, let's say, the hull A or maybe even hull B will likely be the ones keeping those base nodes going by delivering foods, med, tools, and stems while picking up whatever core commodity that node produces, like raw ore or food or meds, that sort of thing. I would also expect, just based on the deliverables that seem to be wrapping up around the same time, the whole sea will herald in such things as more physicalized cargo, persistent hangars and habs, manual load and unload of cargo, and the underlying economy quanta actually starting to track those deliveries for the overall economy. What's more, hopefully, we will start seeing actual NPCs flying around the verse and picking up the slack in the economy. So making deliveries and picking things up. But I wouldn't hold my breath for that one just yet. I would think that that would actually show up as a deliverable on the progress tracker. And that one might be more for when server meshing is really up and rolling. NPCs will pick up the slack if the players don't meet it, but a player who pays attention can get ahead of that wave. And that's why I think the whole sea is important, not because of the physical ship itself necessarily, but because of all the mechanics that have to be in place for that ship to function properly. This is a sign that CIG is becoming more confident in solving and installing quanta in its final form, but also that they're becoming more confident and secure about server meshing and persistent. And that's a great sign that things in this project are possibly finally turning that corner from dream to reality. So stay tuned. And that's all I have for this one, gang, so catch me next time.